Here's a story. After 6 days, Jesus took Peter and James and John with him and led them up a high mountain where they were all alone. And there he was transfigured before them, and his clothes became dazzling white, whiter than anyone in the world could bleach them. And there appeared before them Elijah and Moses, who were talking with Jesus. And Peter said, "Rabbi, it's good for us to be here. Let us put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah." He didn't know what to say. They were so frightened. Then a cloud appeared and covered them, and a voice came from the cloud, "This is my son, whom I love. Listen to him." And suddenly, when they looked around, they no longer saw anyone with them except Jesus. And as they were coming down the mountain, Jesus gave them orders not to tell anyone what they had seen until the Son of Man had risen from the dead. So, one of the things that Jack said many years ago when I first ever encountered him live was he talked about the confessional church and the need to kick down the walls from the inside. Kick out the walls from the inside. I wrote it down and kept it. And in some ways, I think that was one of the metaphors that I lived with for quite some time. So I have a group of people in LA, and we are attempting really to look at things slightly differently. So maybe this is a different take. I picked the story because it's got a trick of light and a couple of ghosts, so it seemed to fit. But it also seems to me that there's a lot in this story that we know and that maybe we need not to know anymore. So it's an interesting tale, because in Mark's gospel, it's the axis of the story and everything changes from here. And once they go down the hill, it moves towards the end. And, Mark's gospel is dark, to say the least. It's quick. There's not much information. Everybody's frantic, suddenly, immediately, just then. It's almost like everybody's slightly spooked and slightly freaked out. And Jesus is not a happy camper. And his relationship with everybody around him gets worse and worse and worse as the book goes on. So right before this story, Jesus has fed 4,000 people. And it's been quite successful because he didn't have much to go with. And everybody's wondering about that. And then he has a conversation with the disciples, and he asks them this question. He says, who do you say that I am? Or who do the people say that I am? And they say, well, some people say you're John the Baptist, back from the dead. Some people think you're Elijah. And most people think you're some kind of prophet. So basically, nobody knows, but there's something going on. And then he says, well, who do you say I am? And Peter says, well, obvious, you're the Messiah. And Jesus goes, yeah, keep that to yourself, and let me tell you what's going to happen to me. And then he talks about his demise. At which point, Peter goes, no, wait a minute. Let me just take you over here. And he takes Jesus to the side. Says, you can't be talking like that. This is not the way things should be. And so Jesus rebukes him and says, wait a minute. You're the devil right now. So there's this amazing moment where he sees something, and then the next minute he's completely wrong. And then Jesus turns around to everybody else and says, look, here's the deal. If you want to follow me, you have to take up your cross, deny yourself, and follow me. And all of that happens before this event. And, we're really good at taking bits of the text, the bits that we like, and lifting them out and not looking. But it's a story, and it's a narrative arc that is rich in all of these connecting points. So all of that feeds into this. And the interesting thing is that we usually take those stories that come before to prove that Jesus was the Messiah. But the interesting thing is that when Peter says he's the Messiah, Jesus doesn't respond by saying, yeah, you're right. He starts to call himself the Son of Man. So in response to Peter's claim that he's the Messiah, Jesus starts this Son of Man talk. Now, in more sort of stable and traditional worlds, I think, imitation and induction and maybe initiation are usually enough, I think, to get people along in the journey and bring them to some sort of point of maturity. But we don't live in those times. We live, I think, in very different times. We live, as they say, in modern times. And in the modern world, we meet more and more situations where the outcomes are less and less predictable, where life is less and less something that we know and understand, and more a complex, confusing set of circumstances that changes and changes and ever changes, and we're never quite sure what to do. And part of that plays out within the religious landscape as it plays out everywhere else. I think the questions that are emerging with religion today are no different than questions that are emerging about love or life or sex or relationships or politics or economics. I think the times in which we live, everything is just up for grabs. And everywhere people are looking for sort of new logics to guide the choices and the decisions that we make. And because we're encountering situations and circumstances that in some ways we haven't encountered before. And that has implications, I think, for how we read things and how we see things. And so in a story like this, I think there are some interesting points. Because I think in an increasingly sort of unpredictable and incalculable world, driven by this desire, or not desire, this need to understand things in a different way, that people's personal concerns are not only coming to the surface, but driving how we approach life. And we seem to be driven by the constellation of our particular concerns. And that has impact on how we live out our lives. It's why I think people choose communities based to some extent on whether they think that their ultimate concerns can be addressed in that particular environment. So all of that to say that in this story, you have an interesting amalgam or collision of things that are going on. Peter, who just gets worse and worse in Mark's gospel. I mean, the great thing about Mark's gospel is that everybody just goes downhill from the beginning. And really, we talk about, or people talk about sort of ideas and concepts of discipleship. But in Mark's gospel, discipleship is really disaster until after the end, which is vague, and then it begins. But anyway, so Peter is reading this scenario of Jesus in a certain way. And he assumes a set of things. And based on those assumptions, he misinterprets. And so he equates some things. He begins by going, well, everybody thinks you're a prophet, but I think it's bigger than that. I think you're the Messiah. And of course, we love that Messiah talk. So we agree with Peter. But really in the story, Jesus doesn't agree. He names himself something else, something other, the human one, this kind of essential human being, if you like. And he refutes, and again and again and again, he sort of pushes back on this notion. And all of these stories that come after that, I think actually are a pushback on those concerns that are driving Peter, that he projects onto Jesus, that he wants Jesus to be whatever he wants him to be. Which is why I think Jesus sort of turns around a little bit later and says, look, you have to take up your cross and follow me. It's the concern of your life, not his cross, your cross, whatever that is. Deny yourself, the self that's defined by the drives and the desires and the concerns that you project on things to get you somewhere. So he's got these thoughts, and they go up a mountain, and there's this ghostly apparition, Moses and Elijah, the sort of epitome of authority and an idea in the church, the ancestors who bestow authority and legitimacy on everything. And there they are, they're on the top of a mountain, and this must be good. This must mean something, and what it seems to mean is what Peter wants it to mean. So Moses and Elijah appear, and then they disappear, And he turns to Jesus. Again, you'd think he'd learn his lesson, but no. He turns to Jesus and he goes, this is really good. We should stick around here. And we should build some tabernacles. We should make some shrines. One for you and one for Moses and one for Elijah. That would be fantastic. And then a cloud envelops them. And there's a voice from this cloud. And it's interesting because in Mark's gospel, God only appears twice. He speaks twice. In the beginning when Jesus is baptized, and here on the top of this mountain. And it's the last time you hear from God in Mark's gospel. And if you like, it's the exit of God from Mark's gospel. This sky God that comes down with Moses and Elijah disappears. So Peter thinks that this is a moment where Jesus is just going to step into what's been and what he needs and what he wants. But it's a new time. And it's not a time of passing the baton. It's a time where an old way comes to an end. And it comes to an end on a mountain, which in the Gospels and maybe in religion, there are these places of revelation, different things happen. Mountains feature heavily in most religions. There's these places where you go and encounter the gods. Deserts where you go and encounter yourself, on water where there's some kind of initiation and ritual in something. And Jesus sort of goes up mountains, but he's always coming down the mountain. And this is the last big mountain thing in here. And so Jesus comes and he takes over this role. The cloud speaks, if you like. And he says, listen to my son. That's the word that comes. And as I said, it's the second and last time in Mark's gospel that there's any voice from God in the story. The interesting thing about Mark's gospel is how little God is involved in the story. If you read it and you look at it again, you see that it's a bleak tale, a godless tale, a tale of kind of absence of the divine and the sacred in the way you expect it to be. So the cloud speaks, they're enveloped in this cloud, and it disappears. And if you like, it's a sort of farewell. It's a godly exit strategy. Because he says, this is my son, listen to him. Which thus far, nobody has. And unfortunately, for the next 8 chapters, nobody still will. Because the book is an invitation to consider, I think, what it is that drives us, that makes us not listen, but project desire upon this thing. So the cloud speaks, and then the cloud disappears. And in the middle of all of this, of course, Jesus has undergone this trick of the light, this metamorphosis. He's taken on something, but it's symbolic. It's meant to symbolize and energize and or it's like a spotlight on somebody. Here it is. This is what you need to see. And the old dies off and the new appears. And then they go down the mountain. And Jesus says, keep this to yourself. Now, we always figure that because, maybe we think there's this inside knowledge. But I think it's more than that. I think it's about the fact that continually through Mark's gospel, Jesus sheds these notions that we place on him about who he is and what he's up to. And his take on things is not an encounter on a mountain, but you go live down on the earth. He's not the Messiah. He's the human one. He hasn't come to take us up a mountain. He's come to live down the mountain with us. So when you think about these stories, and you think about the people in these tales, and you realize that, or you can consider maybe for yourself or for the people that you live with and that you live around, that we have these ideas that we hope and think will get us somewhere. but they don't. And the gospel becomes this place where we are invited to face the dichotomy or the challenge between what we want and what's really going on, or what we want and maybe what we need. I don't know. But in societies on the move, static tales are not very helpful. In societies of uncertainty, declarations of certainty are not very helpful. So this is why, for me, Mark's gospel is my favorite one, because even the ending, they had to tack a bit on after a couple of centuries because it just didn't end well. And you've got the resurrection, but you don't have the resurrection. What you've got is an empty tomb with no explanation. You've got a bloke in it wearing a white robe. You got a bloke in it wearing a white robe that's a hint at what happened on the mountain. It's white robe that's shining, same word that's here in the Transfiguration. And the women who come, and they're looking, and they're not told. So there's no grand ending. There's just yeah. And where do they have to go? Back to Galilee. Back to the place of beginnings, to learn to live the story over again. So part, I think, of the conversation here, in my 1 minute and 6 seconds left, is hearing the story again. Jack said last night that truth is a matter of interpretation. It's neither absolute or arbitrary. The whole notion of truth, particularly within evangelicalism, is this huge, almost stumbling block, because apparently for most people the only answer to certainty is relativism, and nobody wants to slide into that. But as Picasso said, unless a work of art has at least 10 meanings, it is no work of art at all. And when we come to a tale like this, we come to a tale like this armed with foreknowledge that blinds us to the light. So, I don't know. I guess what I'm saying is there is no God, and we are his disciples.